and use body language as well, gestures, right?
Right.
So your students will also understand what to do initially till they're more comfortable with the language, till it becomes second nature, right? Which
Right.
takes some time.
Absolutely. I think in the starting of the class with the hello ma'am, welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, Parth. Thank you so much for having me again.
All pleasure, ma'am. So this podcast is dedicated for the French teachers. In the previous podcast, we talked about the opportunities and the challenges, the strategies that the French learners can use to improve their French language skills, and what all opportunities are there in different domains. Now, this podcast is specifically dedicated for the French teachers because I'm sure with your expertise, with your experience, French teachers will be definitely benefiting from this podcast because you are having an experience of more than 10, 12 years now, and you have worked in various fields, various organizations. So I'm sure, French teachers will be like looking forward to know, different opportunities that exist right now, and a lot of teachers who are there in this field, or maybe somebody who is just like starting as a French teacher, they might not be aware about all those opportunities for them. So we will be talking about all those things. The first thing, ma'am, I wanted to know, like, what are some effective teaching techniques that that work well for the French learners?
So before we actually get into all the teaching techniques, right? My question really is, for all the French teachers out there, or somebody who's just starting off, what
Right.
is the main goal? What is the eventual goal or objective of teaching? Eventually, to render a student autonomous, right? Independent. The student
Right.
should not need you after a certain time. They should be able to do that work on their own.
Hmm.
Right? So that is the eventual goal. So whatever task it is, right? For example, if you're starting off with obviously the A1 level,
Right.
we discussed in our previous podcast about the different levels that we have in our language, right? A
Right.
European language. So you have A1, A2 for the beginners, B1, B2 for the intermediate, and
Right.
C1, C2 for the advanced levels. So when you're starting off, let's say as a teacher teaching a student who's in the A1 level, and let's say one of the tasks that they have to do is buying bread, right? Buying bread and maybe croissant or something of that sort
Right.
at the bakery, right? So you're going to give them the tools so that they're going to eventually be able to do this in France. You're
Hmm.
not going to be there accompanying the student to
Right.
France, right?
Right. Right.
They should be able to autonomously do this activity in that particular situation in real life, right? So that's the first goal of any teaching, any
Hmm.
learning. It's to become autonomous. It's to make your students autonomous. So keeping this
Right.
in mind, there are different, effective techniques that one can use for foreign language training, right? Like I used the word earlier, a task. So basically, the first thing that we're going to talk about is task-based learning.
Okay.
Yeah. So what is a task really? Basically, it's different skill sets that a person will use in order to achieve a certain goal.
Hmm.
It could be booking train tickets,
Right.
booking flight tickets,
Hmm.
right? Having a telephonic conversation with someone, presenting oneself.
Right.
So this is a task. In this, you use different ideas in a language, right? You use different competencies, which is listening, reading, speaking, writing. Then
Hmm.
you have different sort of training for vocabulary and for grammar as well. But keep the focus on the task, right? Give the students enough tools so that they are able to manage the task themselves.
Hmm.
Yeah, this method really encourages students to apply a language in a practical and a meaningful situation.
Makes
Yeah.
sense. Right, ma'am.
So there are many different ways of doing this. So I'd suggest reading up a little as well online about task-based learning. The other methodology that one can use in class is communicative language teaching. Basically, what you're trying to do is you're giving your students enough opportunities to interact in French. Right? If it is only a grammar class, there's going to be not much of communication, right? You are training somebody on a certain topic, right? So try to make the language class as communicative, as interactive in nature as possible, so that it becomes easier.
Right.
So you can pair students for dialogues or discussions, for example. I mean, the the only communication need not be between a student and a teacher, right? It can also be between different students,
Between
groups
different
of students.
Right.
And this interaction actually facilitates learning, because peer learning, it's a very good method, to train your students to be able to listen effectively to what their classmates are saying, and also to be able to correct them.
This method works best with the younger students, like the school students, or also with
No,
the
it works with everyone. It works with everyone, because all of us actually do have that ability to be able to correct somebody else, right? For that, we have to be aware of what we are saying. So
Right.
in a way, what happens is, we are being more diligent about our work, right? Trying to be as perfect as possible, but we're not looking at perfection. But, internally, what happens is, when I know that you are going to listen to me, you're going to correct me, I'll
Right.
try to minimize my errors.
Right. That's
Right?
correct.
And also, if you're a friend or you're a peer, you're my classmate, when you correct me, a lot of people tend to get offended when somebody in authority, like a teacher, tries to correct them. Right? So when a classmate or a friend is doing it, it's taken as it's taken in much better. I
It's
mean,
taken
this is from my
positively, I guess.
experience.
Yeah, that's true.
Sorry?
It's taken positively, I guess.
Exactly, definitely. Apart from that, teachers can use authentic material, right? So you have a lot of authentic documents online. It could be a newspaper article, it could be podcast, it could be a podcast on the radio. You can use those to also facilitate your classes. You have different websites, like, for example, RFE, which is RFI.
Right.
You have France Inter, which is French Inter, right? So you have these audios, podcasts that you can use.
Correct.
Right? Apart from that, you have technology as well that you can incorporate in your learning and teaching right now, right? So you have different platforms to create and conduct quizzes, for example. You have Quizlet, you have quizzes, you have learning apps, Kahoot, if you want a more interactive participation.
Yes.
So feel free to use technology in class, and try to make the learning and teaching as immersive as possible, which means try to create an only French environment in your class. Right? So initially, maybe you can take 1 or 2 classes to explain standard phrases to your students, for example, like, vous comprenez? Do you understand? And then the students will say oui or no, right? So from day one, from minute one, you're starting off in French.
Correct.
And oui and no is not very difficult to say. Right?
Absolutely.
And then, slowly ask them to say, oui, je comprends, which is yes, I understand, or no, je ne comprends pas, right? And use body language as well, gestures, right? So your students will also understand what to do initially, till they're more comfortable with the language, till it becomes second nature, right? Which takes some time.
Absolutely. I think in the starting of the class with the normal greetings like "Comment ça va?", "Ça va bien?", and ending of the class also with the greetings. That will also encourage them to to start the class in French and to end the class in French also.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you practice a little bit of this every day consistently, and then you'll see that the classroom environment gets very immersive. And the students also feel very proud, and they want to go back home and show off to their parents if you're talking with a younger audience, about a younger audience, or even adult learners. They want to just show off whatever they learned in French in that class, right? So it's nice, it's very rewarding. Apart from that, focus on pronunciation early on, because it's a new language at the end of the day, right? The goal is for you to be able to understand what the other person is saying, and for you to be able to make sure that you are understood by the other person.
Correct.
Right? So correct pronunciation is something that one must definitely focus on. And I think one of the last topics that I would like to touch upon is the cultural integration. Right? So when you say French, it's spoken in 5 continents, right? So which country's French are you really talking about? In Canada, the cultural ideas would be different from what you have in France, in Luxembourg, in Belgium, in Africa, right? So for that, the teacher also needs to be aware of what cultural knowledge they're transmitting. A lot of research is required for this, right? Or actual past experience that one might have. And the last part I feel is, which is most important, is regular feedback and reflection. So you can also, as a teacher, give your students very important feedback, what they're very good at, what they're okay with and what they need to improve on, right? And this is viewed as very well. Ask your students to also do a self-evaluation just to see what they are good at and not good at.
Right.
It's not about passing or failing, right? It's about understanding a certain concept. So you have to, I think, make the environment as learner-friendly as possible. You put the student in the center of the learning activities, and then you see, how the class goes. This, I
Absolutely.
think, is a very effective way of teaching. This is what I do in my class, and I've seen that it's very effective so far. But, feel free to experiment, because there's no hard and fast rule, right? Feel free to experiment, observe what activities might be beneficial for your students, what may not work. Because what can work, for example, with a kids group or a teenagers group will definitely not work for an adult, or it could, right? We can't really say. Sometimes even in terms of adult learners, the morning group may be more fresh, right? But the evening group, after working the whole day, we're tired, right?
Absolutely.
So it really depends, something that might have worked in your class in the morning at the same level may not work in the evening. So you have to really experiment and see what works best.
Absolutely. And ma'am, also as a French teacher, I also have this question, this confusion. Many times when I take a class with A1 level, I usually talk and explain the things in English only, because they are not at that level that where they can understand and comprehend our, speaking very easily. But then I have seen that people who are at A2 level also, and like maybe somebody who is directly joining us in A2 level, they are also not having that, that understanding of the language where they can understand all the concepts in French. So, as a French teacher at Alliance, what do you prefer? I mean, do you conduct your classes totally in French, like from the A1 level or from the A2 level, from the very beginning, or do you also try to use both the languages, like English and French, or like how do you advise all the French teachers to to take their courses and take their classes?
Right. So to answer that, right, it really depends on your group. But mostly I prefer using in the A1 level as much French as possible with minimal, usage of English. I'm not saying I don't use English at all, but I minimize my usage of English, because how do I give them the immersive environment if I'm speaking in English all the time? Right? I tell them at one point, I don't understand English. You know these dialogues, you know these lines, say it in French, right? So, for example, on the first day of class, after the initial bonjour, comment ça va, my name is, je m'appelle, all of that,
Right.
what I start with is les outils en classe, okay? Like the tools, les outils de communication en classe. So, how do you use communication tools in class? Right? For example, an instruction could be like, ouvrez le livre. And I show them, right? You have books with you.
Right.
Or you use gestures, like open your book. Fermez le livre, right? Like close your book. And you get them to repeat it, to get them to understand what the sounds like, what ouvrir, fermer, all of this means. Right? They will be very stumped because it is obviously the first hour of class, maybe the first day of class, right? But you try to introduce these ideas slowly. Right? Another thing could be like, how does one say a certain word in French? Like, for example, comment on dit téléphone en français, or comment on dit bottle en français, right? Then you ask them simple questions like, how would you identify this, right? Or identify that. And, qu'est-ce que c'est? And then they'll say what they think is. And then you ask them, you remember what it was like? We spoke about this. How do you say this in French, right? Do you remember that question? And it'll come back to them, right? So you just have to constantly get your students to practice what they have learned. But for that, you have to introduce initially certain keywords or certain key phrases that they can initially memorize, and then slowly they'll use it.
And ma'am, what about A2 level? Like you conduct the classes all like totally in French, or like you still use?
No, again, after the A2 level, I use as little English as possible. The higher the level, the lesser the usage of English, actually, I would say.
Right.
Yeah. So, in A2, I explain in English only when I see that the students are absolutely not getting something, because that can happen. right? You can be the best in the world as a teacher, but sometimes the students just can't understand, right? Or something that you're doing may not work for that certain batch.
Right.
It may have worked for somebody else, but it's not working for the current batch. That's where you're absolutely forced to switch your language and then, explain in that particular language.
So that really
But
depends on the batch.
it depends on the batch, but it also depends on your way of doing it, right? But at the same time, if the student knows how to ask you certain questions in French and you keep allowing them to do it in English, what will happen is that they will not speak in French at all. Right? So you have to firmly get them to use French, but not in a strict way. You have to make the environment very learner friendly. So you have to see how you want to manage that. It'll come with practice, but initially at least, try to encourage and tell your students as well, like upfront, be upfront about it. Tell them that you're going to create an immersive environment and they are not expected to understand 100% of whatever it is that you're saying. Even if they understand 50 to 80% somewhere there, that's enough. Right? Because we are not expecting anybody to understand 100% of what's happening.
True.
Also, what happens is in a classroom environment, when you see other peers working, you will figure out automatically what it is that needs to be done. Also, I'd encourage the participants, the students themselves to really work in the language, the target language, right? Which is French. So they can communicate with each other outside of class, within class, in French. Whatever minimal French they know, that's also fine. Right? As your level progresses, you will anyway be able to speak more and more in that particular language. But that motivation, you have to make sure that you're motivating your students enough, but at the same time, you're not demotivating them by giving them too much of tasks. So you have to really maintain, as an educator, that fine balance.
This is really good because many times I have also struggled, because when I see that my students, they are not able to understand. And they're not able to, able to comprehend what I'm trying to explain in French, or maybe any grammar rule, whatever I'm explaining. So at that point of time, I usually, then switch myself to English, and then, then I try to explain the things in English only.
Right.
But then, the students are not gonna put that, they're not gonna force themselves to speak in French.
Correct.
So as an educator, we have to make them think in French and then speak in French only.
Correct. So also when it comes to explaining grammar rules, right, the way I do it at least is that I put up, for most of the grammar in French, this is how it works, right? I put up whatever grammar topics it is that we need to look at. It could be examples. So I put up examples. I ask the students to observe the example, because language is best learned via observation. You observe first. You see what is similar, what is different. Then you get them to think, why is it like that? Right? Listen to the sound. See, it depends again on what aspect of French you're working on. If it is proper grammar or pronunciation or both together, right? You'll have to break it down and you'll have to ask them, try to get responses from them before you actually explain it. Because that's where they are thinking. When they think, they're going to do better and they're going to remember that concept, because, they'll say, hey, 2 weeks back, I told the teacher this, so maybe this is correct and maybe this is how I'm going to remember it. Right? You see what works best for you to, work with your students.
Absolutely.
Some grammar concepts, you do have to explain it directly, because sometimes the books are not adequate enough, or, sometimes the grammar is very implicit, right? The students may not have that particular level to be able to figure that out. So that's up to the instructor then to, give them better examples or ask them better questions so that you can get answers from them.
Absolutely, ma'am. And now, as you discussed, as you just mentioned about the book, so a question just popped up in my mind. Which book would you recommend, ma'am, for the French learners? Like somebody who is just starting with the, let's say, if we talk about adults, and they are starting with the A1 level. So which French book would you recommend for the French learners to start with?
So the Alliance Française in the world, right? They're using this book called Adult Learners. They're using Cosmopolite.
Right.
And now very soon in India, we're going to start using a book called Inspire. Inspire. Yes. So either of these work, right? All of these are tried and tested methods.
Right.
You can work with these. There are some older books, like for example, you have Echo, you have Alter Ego, you have Alter Ego Plus.
Saison also.
Saison. Yes. So there are many versions, but see what works best for you, right? And what is used currently in the world. I wouldn't
Okay.
say limit yourselves to the Alliance in India.
Right.
You can always do it like all over the world, right? See what
Hmm.
works best. But this is what's happening in India at the moment. So maybe if you want to eventually join an alliance or whatever it is, right?
Right.
Try and use a book that is used by the alliances here.
Same, ma'am. Same. Even I follow Cosmopolite because I have done my studies from Alliance Française de Chandigarh. So I follow the same pedagogy. I follow the same curriculum that Alliance Française follows. And but for the school students, ma'am, do you have some recommendations? Because schools they follow a different pattern altogether.
Correct, correct.
So
So
do you have a recommendation for the school students also?
for school students, I believe most of us actually use Apprenons le Français,
Hmm.
right? And you have Enchanté. But apart from that, if you want to use a more immersive way of learning,
Hmm.
you can introduce them to Adomania.
Adomania.
Yeah,
Yes. It's a
yeah,
wonderful book.
Adomania. It's a very good book. The
Yes.
previous version was called Ado's Fair. That's another version.
Okay.
So both of these are quite useful. For kids, you have this book called Loustic, Les Loustiques.
Lelusti.
So you can use that. For corporates, again, you have different books,
Right.
Objectif Express. So you really have to see the kind of